Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I'm aware Sana is out today. I did sync with her a little bit before she went on vacation. I guess I'll need help from you folks. I did listen to some of the recordings and follow on the documents, but maybe someone like Tal or others can help, Bernard and others can help, drive this meeting forward. I'll catch up as we make progress.
Yeah, I guess I don't have anything specifically prepared by the agenda, but I can maybe recap where we are right now.
Yeah, I think my biggest thing is we need to look at. I would like to understand where we are at the R2 planning. I've seen the document and so forth, but I didn't find a very crisp set of details of deliverables for R2. So that would be my preference for the topmost agenda item. So if you could maybe Tal and others, if you could help recap for me quickly where we are, what are the next steps to close in and zero in on the R2 focus areas?
Sure, I think what you said is accurate. We're not there. We don't have a crisp story yet. In the last meeting, Sana prepared a useful diagram showing some of our north, south, east, west connections that we're looking at more carefully for R2. But it's true, we don't have very clear user stories. I've added some ideas about a few POCs that we can do related to ORAN, Tosca, policy framework, and Helm. There has been progress and discussions on some of these topics in other SIGs, but in this SIG, we have not, as you said, we don't have a really crisp story for what is the scope of what we want to achieve. And honestly, we don't have a lot of time for development for the R2 release. So I think we should pick our topics and pick very, very succinct and short and clear ideas for each of them. Possibly even remove ones that we don't think will make it for R2. Yeah, that is my thinking.
This is Byung. So after meeting last week, we talked about north-south and east-west. So for north-south, I don't know who drew this diagram picture for use cases. So you consider Store 003 or other API or OIO2 API from Oren. So I shared this diagram with Seshu, who is the OSC PTL. So if we need to go that path, then we need to share our thought and consideration with the OSC team. And so anyway, so do you have any narrow the scope? Because the diagram looks like it's open. You can go through NFEO or you can go through Oren CMO talking to nephew, but which specification, northbound API, and then so that's the like I don't know. I thought we were gonna discuss that one, so I invited the Seshu to this meeting. I don't think he came, but I don't think he come. But anyway, I thought that was a discussion topic.
Yeah, no, I think we could possibly try to dig into ORAN. I see that Alexei from Red Hat is here. He might have some feedback, and there are a few others here. So many of us are involved in ORAN. But yeah, we have various options. We can provide a northbound API to ORAN, and there are various east-west connections, and also southbound if we want to connect to an ORAN O2 cloud. So yeah, there's a lot that we can do on that. And I don't know what is the most mature and what is the most impressive and what is the most possible for us to do in the time frame.
Yeah, that's we try to
yeah.
set up the scope.
Yeah, I wonder if we, yeah, please go ahead.
No, I mean, you mentioned the Oren teams here. So I'm doing some studying, some analyzing the diagram. So O2 DMS, let's talk about DMS first. O2 DMS, there is the O2 DMS SC-based profile and O2 DMS Kubernetes profile. To me, based on my analysis, the O2 DMS SE NFV is too complicated for NFV use cases. So that means we prefer to O2 DMS Kubernetes profile. And that's the kind of discussion. So we may need to put some more detail to this diagram. So anyway, that was my the studying ongoing. I'm trying to make a Google Doc for my analysis, but we need to define the R2 scope, the discussion. Anyway, go ahead. Alexis has some raised hand. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. No, this is a very good analysis, and thank you for this. There is definitely for the DMS part in ORAN. So the DMS is really what manages application lifecycle management and placement. And it supports two different profiles. I think the Kubernetes profile is what would be the most easy to introduce within Nefio if we want to standardize the northbound interface towards SMO for ORAN, because it's a one-to-one to the Kubernetes API. So there is out of the box no effort to integrate with the O2 DMS profile for Kubernetes.
Okay.
So that one is, I think, almost a no-brainer. Then the O2 IMS is where it becomes a bit more convoluted discussion because of the way the O2 IMS first its current level of standardization, and second, the various services that it contains. And I think to make a meaningful analysis for Nefio, we should look into all the services the IMS contains and see what makes the most sense for Nefio to start looking into. And I'm happy to I'm happy to animate that discussion, because I've been doing such analysis lately as I've been trying to bring more of a declarative aspect to the O2 IMS. But obviously there is some pros and cons, and in the ORAN team, my goal is currently to converge on what is that possible declarative interface for IMS, and the expectation is in the next couple of, I think, hopefully by November, have something more formalized and accepted that could serve as an input to Nefio downstream. I see a lot of people reacting, so I'll stop here. Thank you.
I think Team Carrier, right hand, raise
Yeah,
hand.
just real quick, because I know what Alexis is talking about on the IMS side, but even on the DMS side, I'd be careful. Certainly, I believe this analysis is correct that you probably want to look at the Kubernetes side first, which is just using the Kubernetes API. But that team has not defined any CRDs for any of the OCloud type of resources. So I don't think it's as straightforward, Alexis, as you said, because there's some missing specifications. But it is based upon the API in general, right? So, and I'll leave
If I
that.
may.
Yeah, go ahead, Alexis.
Well, I probably won't react here, but I have definitely reaction to this comment. But I think this is fair. Thank you, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I think I'm next. This is Antu. We're pretty much at the end of August. We have September and October to start talking about O2 IMS and DMS integration at this point is fine, but I don't think from an implementation point of view, there's enough time for the team to understand it and implement it by November. So my thinking is we can start doing the exploration and use case definition and high level architecture integration of the the APIs proposed and all that. But if any implementation to be done, I don't think it's gonna be R2. I think it should be either park it in the experimental repo as exploration proof of concepts, and then promoting from those efforts for R3 or R2.x. Timeline wise, is a little too short to get any real progress done for R2. That's all. Thanks.
Wim, you're next, or I guess, I don't know, Bernard. It's hard to figure out. It's right to left, I assume, right? The hands.
No, the other way around. I think you were first, I think, and then Bernard.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe what I want to understand, like 3 weeks ago or so, before I went on vacation, right? We had at least some of us had proposed the main track to be deploy and configure commercial. Now I see some of the comments saying commercial might be difficult, but some more than one network function, right? Vendors, 5G core network functions. In this case, we picked 3 AMF, SMF, UPF, in line with deploying and configuring at least one ORAN network function. We had said VCU VDU. Has that still been the main theme, and we are now doubling down on the specifics, or are we still now debating on what the main theme itself should be? Now, within the theme, of course, we should be doing both D0 and 1 with a stretch goal of day 2, as an example. But is that what the community generally feels should be the R2 scope, given we are 3 months out?
I would not agree.
Okay,
So
and maybe Bernard, help me understand.
Yeah. So my concern is simply, we have proven that it's possible to make use of the nephew concept to roll out a 5GC, and the same will also be possible, I'm sure of that, if we have the sort of proper CRDs to sort of facilitate the nephew mechanisms to deploy that somehow. What I'm missing is the concepts of how the decoupling of responsibilities is being managed without having to include a lot of a huge amount of experts in this exercise. We've seen sort of what an effort it was to sort of set up the 5G sort of solution, and not in all cases do all the NatCos or the telco operators have the possibility to make use of this amount of expertise to facilitate that process in the same manner. Sort of what I would love to see is sort of a sort of well-defined onboarding procedure, which clearly explains how network functions need to be described and how infrastructure capabilities are being exposed, so that in the context of the onboarding process, the CIQ would allow us to automate the deployment procedure in a well-defined manner. And then we can sort of apply that, of course, to the specific use case such as ORAN and 5G. And I've also written down sort of 2 sort of use case scenarios of how that could sort of be demonstrated. But again, I repeat myself here again, it's not about sort of rolling out a free 5GC or rolling out any kind of demo ORAN solution. This is not helping us when we're going into real life production. We need to have concepts which clearly show how these nephew sort of procedures can be applied to those deployments which we have in our production. And I'm missing this sort of concept part, which is then demonstrating how these things work. And I would like to add one last comment. I agree with Antu regarding the scoping of this northbound, southbound, east-west type of integration. I do believe that we need to first invest a little bit of architectural design work in sort of this work stream, and then later on demonstrate that with an implementation. We cannot directly jump into implementation and then see sort of something comes out, but the question is, what does that prove? Okay, that would be it from my side.
So Bernard, your comments are extremely valid, right? Maybe if you could help give more specific inputs on what are these. I know in the past you have talked about some of the schema modeling, infrastructure to network function dependencies, and so forth. I think if you could document some of these crisp asks in terms of both the network design as well as implementation outcomes that you would like to see for these concepts for R2, I think that would benefit, because I'm with you that just showing something in a more incremental way may not be in itself useful unless we prove these concepts.
We've captured that already in the document. I've shared the link, and sort of here, I've written down what are the questions which need to be answered. I've written sort of use cases which sort of could demonstrate that, and then based on that, I believe it's sort of not really trying to sort of come up with totally new topics, but just making sure that what we've been developing in R1 is now being put into a concept which can then be applied to other scenarios if we then sort of have vendors coming along with their solutions, etc., where we say this is the recipe of how these things should be sort of executed.
Kosek, maybe I'll jump in. I'll respond a little bit to Bernard and to give you my perspective on the thing, right? So I think we have two different type of, let's say, views, but maybe not. Maybe there's people have the same view, but there is two different set of requirements that we are getting here into the document from my perspective. That is, on one hand, we want to be aligned with what ORAN is doing, right? And for that, we need to probably start some activities to do so. Probably not as a, let's say, probably code. I always call it core and what I think Tal calls proof of concept. So we should be probably having some people focusing on how we integrate Nephew into the ORAN space, and trying to see what that means. But probably not. So the deliverable there is probably not full-blown code potentially, but it's the starting point to get us in R2 or R4, R3 or R4 to be able to deliver something, right? Because if what you see is that we have now these half-year windows, and at least from my perspective, if you don't have a good scope in the beginning of that train, it's very hard to deliver something. And some of these topics like DMS and IMS integration probably requires some analysis and maybe some proof of concepts and figuring out different approaches to be able to then say, okay, this is what we are going to scope for that release, and then you develop and deliver that, right, as a full-blown release. Versus, so that's one set of things that we see here, and I think Antu addressed, or it's to that similar concern, but I think we have to start somehow doing these two things in parallel, from what I'm reading. So one is more preparation for the next releases, and the second is really enhancing to get what we have done to be more carrier or production grade, and that's to the point of Bernard, right? So there are, so what I think he wants to see is so we did a little bit of decoupling from infra and network function, but we had some discussion on it. What I think we really would like to see is that whole thing is automatically reconfigured based on the requirements the NF has, right? We are not there yet. And so these are, in my view, two, they are related because one potentially will impact the other, but they are a little bit two different set of activities as far as I can see that we probably have to deal with. And as such, so if you look to R2 focus from my perspective, it's like, how do we enhance what we have, right? And from my perspective, we could include, and we have been discussing to include the radio side of it, right? But using what we have, but focus also another set of gaps that we have to do, more infra to NF decoupling and stuff like that. So really things where we see that the current solution that we have is not good enough, right? Versus then more the, let's say, medium to longer term aspects of trying to identify the things that we really, where we want to be or to get towards. And I think we have to split those into these buckets from my perspective, and that would probably help a lot the conversation.
I think the next is mine. So I agree with Wim and Tao. I think that I agree to 2 tracks fine and R2, and then but we need to discuss about this north south east west integration, because currently Nephew is an island, and we need to see how it's gonna be used by the upper layer. So anyway, talking about O2 DMS and even the Sol 3. Instantiate Kubernetes resources is not synchronous the responses, asynchronous. All the SC based, also DMS, they dealing with the async operations. So once you, for example, all NFO, they request to instantiate, and they are waiting for acknowledgement, and then someone has to the bookkeeping the process. So now they're talking to Nephew, and Nephew responds back, okay, then someone else has to continuously check if the really the resource is ready for use. And they once it's confirmed, they have to confirm back to the originator. So those two the management bookkeeping usually handled by used to be VNFM, CNFM, and the Oren case NFO. So this O2 DMS interface specification dealing with that. So that's why Nephew is okay, R2 if you want to focus on the enhancement, but R2 to interface the upper layer, there's the additional the concept you need to consider. That means the Nephew, when we design the Nephew DOSPA interface, they have to take into that place. Otherwise, later on, you will be shocked, because there are so many complications dealing with the DOS asynchronous and the instantiate terminate, and then also management of the inventory of the DOS lifecycle management, not just the Kubernetes side. This is separately that's why they create the CNFM, and then they're creating NFO. They have to book it. So that's the complication. So we need to discuss that separately. That's why I'm agreeing with the 2 tracks and how. I think we need to sort out, we need to scope out, we choose the specification we choose. My preference is O2, DMS, Kubernetes native, which is Alexis said. SC base is very complicated. That's usually dealing with the OpenStack, not for Kubernetes. So anyway, so that's my point. I think someone has to start on this one. Otherwise, later on, you will be shocked. Okay, that's it.
So if I may propose this, for R2, the SIG2 team is committed to what Vim said, which is exploring options to decoupling and automation. And also there's some tech depths that we have to resolve. But for SIG1, for R2, can we commit to some sort of architecture and use cases for the O2, either IMS or DMS or both, if we have enough participants as a deliverable? So what I'm thinking is, for R1, for R1, SIG2 deliver code, right? Working code. So for R2, SIG2 can keep going with that, while SIG1 deliver the use cases that can be consumed or implemented in R3. So we kind of stagger deliverable. Is that something SIG1 can commit to delivering? Because then, by the R2 release date, we would have a more firm and well-defined use cases and proposed architecture for R3. So we're leapfrogging. if you see what I'm trying to say.
I think that's a good idea.
Also, that would give us some time, right? Because if we try to create, write up the use case in our proposed architecture right now for R2, there's not enough time. So that give us 2-3 months to really double click and deep dive. So that's why.
Yeah. Hey, I think I generally like the sentiment. Maybe I wasn't very clear when I talked about R2 scope as, just doing day 0, 1 for RAN and core. But my thinking essentially was that we have 3 months, and we have not thought through, we have not made a lot of progress yet on the design. We have not made a lot of progress on all these interfaces and so forth. And they will not come in line for R2 timelines. So that is a parallel activity that shapes for R3. But then R2, beyond what we have done, we did only core. If we could do core plus RAN, pick few more, 2, 3 more, let's say, use cases on day 0 and 1. User stories specifically, when I say use cases, right? User stories on day 0, 1, that will give a little bit more roundness to, uh, uh, on top of what we built for R1, in addition to any tech debt that SIG2 wants to do. So that was a very narrow way of scoping R2, while in parallel we make progress on everything else that we talked about. Many of you talked about here, right? So that was my lens of looking at R2, which is what I had proposed as the main theme almost 3 weeks ago, in anticipation that we will not have the time to make progress on all these forward-looking things which are more reasonable to look for R3. So my request is, if we can scope for, if we could extend it to RAN and pick ORAN, pick VRAN, it shouldn't matter. It just gives some more uh, completeness, if you may, on top of R1, which was core only. And we should pick a few more user stories for day 0 and 1 to showcase how Nephew works. This is somewhat incremental, I agree, but to the point that Bernard, you and Anthu and few others, you are making, that we just don't have the time to go much deeper into technology and the concepts in line for R2 delivery. So we should make that as a parallel track, but R2, the implementation track should be at least my proposal is what I just described earlier. And I would love for you folks to comment or, propose alternates.
I have a quick question on that. If you're talking about VRAN or ORAN, as in the RIC, or integration, interacting with the RIC, I'm not so sure we have the expertise to do that for R2, the implementation expertise. At least I don't know much about it, and I've been tracking those for over a year now, almost 2 years now. I mean, I know the requirements. I've been to the ORAN meetings, not recently, but previously. But implementation wise, I'm not so sure how we can implement that.
Okay,
I
and
mean,
so are you
do
suggesting we shouldn't get into ORAN for implementation, right? Is what I'm hearing for R2.
no. I guess my point is, do we have other people, other members who are much more well versed in that? Because I think in SIG2, I don't, I'm not disparaging anyone, but I'm not so sure we have that expertise right now. We need to recruit that for that from the vendor company.
Yeah, hi, Anto.
Go ahead.
Hello. So we are some folks from the Samsung. So we are already working in ORAN HC project. So I think we would be able to assist and also help there to bring some community agreement and also with implementation. So like me, Joseph, Sandeep, we have some knowledge of ORAN HC community.
But I'm not, since you opened it up, are you willing to commit to lead the effort for R2 implementation?
Once actually we can involve in discussing those ideas and also get involved in implementing it. So we are ready, I think.
Okay, that would be great because I mean, Vim and Stephen and other members from SIG2 can correct me if I'm wrong, but in R1, I got the sense that we didn't have the expertise to start looking into the RAN side of the product, the scope, right? So if we have some, that would be awesome. And if you're willing to commit the time to lead the implementation. I mean, a lot of us can code something once the design is explained, right? But I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I don't get the sense that we have that expertise yet. So any member who has that kind of expertise and who want to commit, that would be awesome.
Yeah, Anto, maybe Subhash, I'll respond quickly. So Anto, we had one meeting where the people presented this already. Also, we have Sagar, I think. I don't know whether he's on the call from the OAI, right? So there is already some ongoing effort to onboard, and they have some operators already that they built. So okay, what I'm trying to say is that with the people that are there and what we did in R1, right? So we can probably, yeah, I think, yeah, doing something in the radio, but it's not impossible, I think. So it's, I believe we can do something there. What I don't think we can do in R2 is the full DMS, IMS alignment and what have you. So that's a different thing, right? So from my perspective, I think we can do something into the radio side. If the people from, let's say, Samsung and then Sagar and stuff like that can take the lead, as you said, and then we can augment it with some people that did the workload cluster, so we can share some knowledge in that area. Now, to Bernard's point, if you do that, what you will not do is okay, you have another network function that you onboard, right? So what I think Bernard wants to see is much more decoupling or much more focus on let's say, the interfaces between infra and NF, and to make that way more, or have way more scenarios supported in that from that use case. So that would require some, let's say, different or additional focus. But also not impossible. Not impossible.
Yeah, I would fully agree. And sort of based on that, we would then be able to sort of show how the concepts of Nephew can be applied to different and sort of scenarios in a much easier way. Currently, I would have difficulties in explaining sort of what would need to be done sort of in order to adopt the Nephew approach in our specific production environments. And based on this extension, we would then have sort of blueprints of how sort of the different stakeholders would need to interact.
So is it possible to get Bernard and Vim to document the ideas or features that you're thinking?
I already did that.
Maybe Bernard, what we can do is, I think you have the requirements that you want to see, and maybe we can prepare for one of the calls to maybe focus or give an overview of what it would mean or something like that. So maybe we can work before that, because we are we can maybe discuss together to see from what you want to see what it would mean and stuff like that, right? So to get a perspective.
I really would like to ask you, I've sent around this link in the chat. Yes. And there's a section where we've been explaining the questions to be answered. We've got 2 user stories, which sort of describe sort of how that would be demonstrated. And of course, I didn't go into the conceptual implementation details here, but I believe there is enough information already available to specify sort of what or derive what needs could be sort of potentially done in R2.
Yes, I didn't mean to document, I was cut off, but the document is there. Yes, I'm trying to request access to read it, but more like taking that and translating it into specific feature that R2 can.
Yes,
The
we could do that together.
R262
Yes, sure.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, exactly. That we can translate it into enough details that we can scope it for R2.
Mm.
I feel like I'm wearing product management hat right now.
Eric has his hands up.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Go
Yes.
ahead.
Yes. So I think also it's important to have in mind that we need also to better explain how we can use Nefio for configuration management, because that's something that is very a pain point in let's say network operation today. And unfortunately, with R1, we did a few, let's say, example how to have some basic day2 configuration, but I think we should go more in detail and maybe let's say try maybe to improve what we have in R1 for let's say all this let's say configuration part to manage all the PLMN, how we can add maybe a radio site and all the TAC information and so on. That's something also that will be very helpful for the community and for the service provider to help us in our in the way we operate networks. I think that's maybe something that was at the origin also of Nefio, but we are not talking about it during these sessions. But for us, it's very important to have also this kind of demonstration on how we can push the vendors to adopt this kind of let's say Kubernetes base for the configuration part. And for me, it's also important to have some vendors on board to develop that part. So I know that Wim, you're quite involved, but maybe we should have also maybe other vendors to help us in this journey for let's say for demonstrating how we can use Kubernetes for the configuration part.
Yeah, so I'll try maybe to. I agree 100% with Eric here, but we have an interesting problem in the community where the word configuration has come to mean a few very different things. So if you ask some people, everything we did in R1 was show configuration. But of course, also if you ask other people, for example, you'll say, well, we haven't really addressed configuration. And I think the point is that configuration. What I'm trying to do is introduce maybe a way to talk about two kinds of configuration. There are probably more, but the two kinds that are important for Nefio, the division is between what I call pre-stand-up configuration and post-stand-up configuration in terms of the network function. So we've done, I think, a lot of work in R1 to stand up network functions with the right configuration. But as we know, once the network function is up and running, that's only the beginning, right? That's where a lot of things like VNFMs come into play with higher level orchestrators, service orchestration, of course. Now that the network function is up and connected to its data planes, et cetera, now the configuration fun really begins, right? So that's something that that other side, the post stand-up is something that we haven't really done yet, right? Because we're really struggling to get that first part right. But I think we need to start talking about the second part. And honestly, if we look at all the POCs that we're suggesting for Nefio R2, I think they involve that. You know, service assurance policy, we want to do those things after the network function is running, right? ORAN, a lot of it is running applications and configuring once the network function is running. So setting up network functions, standing them up is hard, but we've already proved that. I think it's time to move on to the other thing. So I agree.
Quickly,
True.
if I may jump back, respond to that. I'm not so sure that the free 5GC network functions will support all the proposed POC features. So there may be need for another set
You're
of network
probably right.
function.
Yeah, you're probably right. And
Yeah,
we're
probably.
looking
But yeah, so that's why maybe if we have some, let's say, commercial vendor on board, it will be better. But that's another story.
Maybe we need another open source network function.
I think we have one. We have one. I think with Saga on the call, he started a very good work on demonstrating how we can reuse the Nefio CRD, the Nefio operator concept, and he did it for ONI solution. And it's I tested and I just it's quite working quite well. And just some little problems to solve, but globally it's very good. And it's also a good, let's say, a good proof that we can reuse Nefio for different contexts. So maybe I think we should have maybe a demo from Saga in the next meeting to explain what he did.
Agree. And also, I'm thinking out loud here, so not firm, not set in stone. But is it possible to in R2 to do OAI bring ups, network function bring up as a user storage feature set? Saga, I think you're here on the call.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. I mean, if we define our use case, exactly what we want to do, I don't think it's going to be a problem because I'm almost done. I've made exactly something what was done for let's say R1 with Free5GC. I created something similar, let's say. I extended a bit further. So yes, for R2, that won't be a problem.
So if SIG1 agree, can we bring that to SIG2 as a feature for R2? And Saga and other people can finalize that implementation? Is that something feasible, Stephen, Tal? I mean, John's not here, so I'm asking you guys.
My opinion is that we can do anything within a limited scope. I mean, it could really be something just very straightforward, just to show a very, very simple demo, right? So I don't think we should shy away from any of the topics we mentioned. Showing a work in progress, showing, it could be a very tiny piece of code, a tiny controller, a tiny package that just shows something, and we build on that. But everybody who's looking at Nefio from the outside will see that we are working on these things and might be more interested in coming in, contributing, etc. So I'm not worried. That's what I mentioned in the chat. We shouldn't be paralyzed by our 6-month cadence, right? Yeah, we have a deadline, but let's not stop it from making progress on everything that we care about as a community to make progress on. We'll have what we have. That's it.
Yeah, no, but we have to prioritize, right? Because if we do a bunch of POC, then we don't have enough resources to do it.
I agree with that. So but we don't even have a plan for any of these, right? So once we have we have some meat on the bones, right? If we have a few actual real ideas, then I think we can start prioritizing and say, well, this is more feasible now. This is what people want to work on now. But I think at this point, all we have is topics.
Yeah, but in this particular case, the OAI bring up, network function bring up, it seemed, I haven't seen the code or look at the work done so far. I don't even know if it's available publicly. But it seemed like there's enough meat already. So I'm proposing that we prioritize this as a main feature for R2 for SIG2. And maybe Saga can bring it to Wednesday meeting, SIG2 meeting, and we can vote on it there or something like that. That's what I'm asking is this particular feature adoptable as a priority? Sorry, Eric, please go ahead. Eric? I cannot hear you. I don't know if the rest of the members can.
Yes, sorry. Yes, I agree with you. But I think maybe what we can do also is Sagar can present you during SIG 2 what he did, and maybe just to understand what is possible to improve for R2 and so on.
Yeah, because if we don't get a set of NF that can support the features we're talking about, like policy, like Helm integration, whatever, then, any of those efforts are kind of dead in the water until we get network functions that can support those things. I'm thinking in terms of, very logical steps.
Yeah, I think it's me now. So I would say I can present it on the Wednesday meeting, which we always have, SIG automation. I'll present it there. Everybody can have a look. Then we can see, based on whatever we have right now for R2, that can we do it using OAI or any other network function, let's say any other open network function which is out there, and then we can move forward. I would say all the things which we have noted down so far, let's say Helm operator and everything, I think most of the network functions can do that, which are out there. We just need to see what exactly we want to show at the end of the day, as we had for R1 as a story, as this blueprint. We just need to define that blueprint.
So circle back to, so that seemed like a viable path forward. Circle back to the post R2, the deliverable user story use case feature that Bernard and Vim were talking about. How do we make progress on that in SIG 1?
So I think so what I was planning to do with Bernard is document potential scenarios, right? And then we'll see what the community says. Yeah.
I actually think onboarding a second network function, even though it's just 5G core, and be able to deploy that simultaneously with two of them is something that we actually don't support today. So even just a use case of that would be something that we probably have to do. Something.
This is exactly what I've been writing in the document. Yeah. So
right.
and also sort of being able to potentially deploy the same network function to different types of cloud environments would be also something where we might have to think about how we would support that.
See, I think that for me, if I may, on the general topic, right? The question that we have to ask ourselves is, what do we want to be from Nephew, right? Do we want to, because see, we can do probably, if we want, we probably can do 30 POCs, which all by themselves will do something, right? But probably if you take them all together, might not work together, or there might be lots of holes, right? So I think we have to make a decision what we want to do at Nephew. Do we want to drive towards something that gets deployed and where we say, okay, this is what the community believes we want to, what Nephew is, and this is what we want it to be and how it will look like, and so on and so forth, versus we have a whole bunch of things that we can do, and then, yeah, they're all a bit of piecemeals next to each other.
Right.
And,
I think even Vim, if
and
you
that
remember,
that for me the big that's for me where I see the discussion is, you either go left or right, and in my view you can do left and right, but the right is then what I call delivering something that's meaningful for the operator and is deployable, and then left meaning preparing for the next stage. And I think versus doing all of that in parallel. And I think these are, for me, the two approaches that you have. Sorry to cut you off, Stephen, but I just want to finish the way I look at it right now. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So I think Vim, Antu, and then myself for sure all remember that very well. That when we started R1 development cycles, or even before then, but prior to ONE Summit, actually, especially, we got into such a huge cycle on SIG2 where every week someone's presenting a new POC, and we kind of get stuck just looking at people doing POC. I think we couldn't afford to do that anymore if we want to deliver something on November. So I'm asking for focus. Sure, do stuff. I mean, as a community, we want people to do stuff. But then from SIG1 particularly, I would like to really see a concrete R2 requirements, user stories, and we can execute towards that. And I think that was the agreement. So that's would be, if anything, that would be a bit of a concern if we start talking about spending most of the time talking about something else.
So I totally agree. I was there for all the POC presentation and getting frustrated in the lack of progress in SIG2 for R1. And that's why I'm proposing all this. So I'm gonna put a stake in the ground and you guys can vote on it. But the OAI NF bring up and the pre-5GC NF, multiple NF on the same, the 2 NF that you were talking. I think you're thinking about the 2 UPF bring up. Those are the stake for R2. On the user story feature use case side, I'll leave it to Vim and Bernard and whoever else was speaking about to commit to delivering them as SIG1 deliverables, meaning not impacting SIG2 progress. Is that the conclusion? Is that acceptable to the audience here, the member here? And any POC that, sorry, one last thing. Any POC that Kyle were talking about and other people were talking about can be done, but with the understanding that they are POC and they will be not R2, but more like R2++, R3, future features, future adopt a prioritize feature. Right now it's exploration, POC, right? I mean, that way we accommodate the 3 perspective raised here today but with a protection of the R2 SIG2 timeline and resources. Yeah. Is that, please go ahead. I think Eric, you still have your hands up. I'm not so sure is that left over? And then Tim and then Bernard.
No, sorry, it's a mistake.
Tim, I think you're next.
So again, okay. So, I'm trying to figure out, and I'm looking at a crawl, walk, run type of thing, right?
Yes.
And so, within SIG2, you created a release 1.0, right? And what Sagar has told you is that he says, hey, look, I've got some 5G core elements. I've got RAN elements that can be applicable for a network automation release 2 incorporation within Nefio, not as an external OAI project, right? But part of that, those use cases that you have as part of your release 1/release 2 in Nefio, right? In SIG2, would incorporate those, right? With all the little test cases and test setups and everything else. So if that's so now that gives me the crawl, okay? Now we know that we want to go, because we want to incorporate broadly for release 2, a RAN solution, right? Then the walk piece is what you're working on back in SIG1 that says, hey, eventually I will want to see this integrated with standardized interfaces with an ORAN, right? And so you can work on the use cases and architectural definitions for that. And Alexis, mentioned much of what's there maybe for DMS versus IMS. You can make distinctions, but you can do that all in release 2 SIG1, right? That gets you crawling and ready to walk for release 3. That's the way that I was hoping the team would go in terms of, incorporating a RAN type of piece. So anyway.
Exactly what I was thinking. I didn't express myself clearly enough like you did. But yeah, 6.1 can do the quote unquote crawling features for R3, while SIG2 does the walking features for R2. Right?
Vice versa, but you understand.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Have not had coffee this morning.
I was
Well, but
only
even then,
crawling when I got into college,
yeah.
so.
Well, so even then, I guess the ask from SIG2 is SIG1 user community particularly, please prioritize defining the user stories and requirements for R2, and then we can have spare time to talk about all the futuristic stuff, but prioritize that.
Totally agree. I think
So
Bernard,
if I may just comment, I fully agree with the proposals which you've made. Just wanted to clarify a little bit that sort of the discussions which, for instance, Wim and I would then conduct are not sort of so far-fetching future type of sort of concepts from my perspective, but things which you would already be proving, because I've been sort of writing in the user story, try to deploy two different types of network functions onto the same infrastructure and sort of try to define that as a standardized procedure. That means you could address that already in the concept of what you are trying to implement with the proposal which you've made with the OAI setup and the free 5GC setup. So I just wanted to clarify that sort of the proposals which we've been collecting sort of on here related to the user stories which I've been writing down are not sort of R3 types of discussions, but things which could be sort of reflected directly in R2.
So to summarize, it sounds like we have the request for two network function on the same infra. We have RAN network function bring up or integration. And we have POC as the three focus area. And then we can start double click on priorities and details as needed. Is that fair summary? A fair summary?
Sorry to jump the line onto, but we also have some technical debt we need to address.
Oh
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's,
Sorry.
yeah.
And technical debt. So that's the fourth. And 1, 2, 3, 4 is just my typing it down, not any implied priority. Sandeep, sorry, you're next.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you about the main tracks which we want to focus on R2, and kind of agree on OAI and other things which we want to do. Yeah, so we also were working on some side tracks. So I think you also covered on that. Would be a side track like SDK's development, which we were targeting in WG4. One of them is overall SDK, which Stephen and all talk, and one of this Helm to operator converter SDK. So this also, I think, this is the thing which we can scope for R2. I think the SDK which we have that could be helpful. The other thing which we have is something like working on is something like POC, as you said, observability, which we are already discussing and having meetings for in Slack channels. So yeah, these are the few things we can work on. But out of all these things, I think Helm to operator SDK could be the possible R2. I mean, obviously, where to check in and all these things, Tal is another taking care. So yeah, just wanted to bring it up here. So what are the side tracks we can commit for the R2? Yeah.
Yeah, the sidetrack. I have a deep interest in Helm integration. My concern is we don't have enough resources right now. We not enough, but sufficient resource to split our focus. And I don't want to prevent any effort, right? If people are interested, please go ahead. But we will leave it to, I mean, I'm hypothetically speaking, leave it to Tal and you and whoever else to focus on that and deliver on that. But we can't distract SIG2 resources.
Yeah, sure.
And understand that at the R2 release packaging, that may be sitting in the side repo, the experimental repo space instead of in the main Nephew space. And then we can promote from there into R3 or R2 plus, if that's okay.
Yeah, okay. No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, from what Kaushik said in the chat, I can, I already note down the 4 or 5 items, so I can throw that into a doc for SIG1 if I have access. I don't think I have access to SIG1 only by piecemeal documentation, but not overall access to create docs. So I might need some help from Vim or somebody who has access. Is that okay? The 5 item I listed with name attached in the chat. 2 network function on the same infra, Vim and Bernard. OAI RAN and Cloud Saga, POC Tao and Sandeep and SDK Stephen and Sandeep and technical debt Vim John and SIG2.
And to Subhash here.
Yeah.
So yeah, I initiated the discussion around the policy also. I think a long time back, and even we are discussing in a SIG2, and also we are preparing the document around it.
Yeah, I'm thinking policy and Helm as POC on the tile because that's how I understand it. And so I'm proposing Tile to lead that and you guys prioritize or allocate resource and commitment to deliverables for R2. But that's under the POC umbrella. Shorthand.
Question I'll raise like let's say our project or our idea let's get matured in the R2. So do you think it will be called as a R2 main track if you are preparing this requirements for R2?
That I cannot make that decision. That's really John's and SIG2 decision in terms of adopting policy as a main track.
So the current list, what you are proposing, is it like a final a list of items that we are discussing for the R2? Is it?
No, yes and no. This is for SIG1 to focus and prioritize, not necessarily SIG2, right? Because whatever SIG1 comes up with, SIG2 have to commit to and put resource to it.
Okay.
It's more like traditional project management, right? We propose a list of feature in SIG1, quote unquote product managers, and then we give it to engineering, and the engineering management come back and say we can do this in this time frame, kind of thing. So that's what I'm trying to facilitate. I'm not trying to. I'm not knowledgeable enough to say this is priority enough.
I put this thought in this way. We should have some ideas which can go beyond R2. And also it is very much needed that the work should start in R2 and it expands beyond R2. So that possibility also we should think as a community. So that
yes. No, yes. The what were we just talking about? The use cases for R3 that are SIG1 would commit to deliver for R2. That I think that's what we're agree. I think we're saying the same thing on that. I'm gonna throw this in a doc and then the community put it up in Slack and the community can discuss, vote, debate until the next meeting.
Exactly. Okay, thank you.
I'm not trying to exclude any features being proposed. I think with that, we're over time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.